Palestinian land, either to the Israelites or to the Palestinian, can the contents of the text can be, is it possible to be revisited to ameliorate the situation? This is the point of concern. Similarly, there are some key other issues related to which makes this this issue a religious one, that is a religion in this particular case, in the Palestinian and the Israeli conflict. It is a part of the problem, or it is a part of the solution. However, it is clear that the recent developments made this issue more Palestinian and Israeli conflict than the issue of Arab and the Israeli conflict. Second, radicalization, fundamentalism, the link between the religion and nationalism, and similarly the role of Zionism and Arab nationalism, the issue of the sanctity of the holy sites, and the rumors that the Israelis, the state of Israel is going to demolish the Masjid al-Aqsa, and the ownership and authority of the Jerusalem, such like questions, they are very pertinent to our today's topic. As I earlier mentioned, that the Jewish belief, that is based on two main beliefs. That is the belief of chosen people, and the second is the Arzul Maw'ud, or promised land. As far as the belief of chosen people is concerned, it is very clear in the Old Testament, which on the basis of which they claim that the Jews have some special relation with Yahweh or God, and he made all the Yahweh or God made covenants with Abraham, then to his descendants. And the basis of that, they claim the ownership of the Palestine, the Palestine. Now the question is, the point of concern is, in the Old Testament, in some verses, it has been mentioned that the land has been given to Abraham and his descendants. I will repeat my words, that in some verses, these verses are present in the Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, and other Old Testament books, that this land has been given to the descendant of Abraham. Ibrahim alayhi salam, he had two other sons, Ishmael, and the Esau. The hardliners, or the tradition interpretation of the Jews, is that they exclude the descendants of Ishmael and Esau, and they say that it is only specified for the descendant of the Isaac and his son Jacob, of 12 tribes of the Israelites. This makes the issue somewhat complex. The concept of then what entails it, the concept of this promised land and chosen people entails that they claim that the possession of the land is exclusive for the Jews by the divine law, and Almighty Allah has given this land to them. In this regard, the Jewish Orthodox faction is considered by the religious organizations and other organizations as they are the fundamentalist group on the Israeli side. The religious Zionist perspective also plays an important role in this issue. The current Likud party also have some claim on the basis of religion. Similarly, they have also the dream of a greater Israel. The dream of greater Israel means that there will be a state of theocratic state based on theocracy with extended borders. They claim. Similarly, they legitimize violence and they extract and they give reference of the Old Testament for the legitimization of violence. There are verses, no doubt, there are verses in the Exodus and the Samuel, etc., that allows the Jewish the extermination of the Amalek and the 7 tribes of the Canaanites. We will discuss later on that whether it is a time bar or it is applicable to the present day time or not. Similarly, the hardliners have a concept of Messiah. They say that the Messiah will come at the end from the Jewish side, and let me share with the students that the concept of Messiah is a shared concept between the among the Muslims, Jews, and Christians. Muslim and Christian, they believe that Jesus Christ will come down again, and he will fight with the Antichrist. Similarly, there is a concept of Messiah in the Judaism. However, in the contemporary era, some of the Jewish scholars, they say that we are now in the Messianic age. This is the one point. Similarly, there was an organization which is banned in the Israelis, that is the Gush Imonim, which was too much hardliners, and I will present their views later on. The Christian Zionists also, they support the cause of the current Israeli state. But one point should be kept in mind, that the Christian Zionists are pro Jews, not pro-Judaism. If someone asks this question later on, I will answer, but this is the point, that the Christian Zionists, they are pro-Jewish, but not pro-Judaism. These hardliners give 3 options to the Palestinians. Number one, they say that, number one, acknowledge the legitimacy of the Zionist doctrine. Number one. Number 2, obey the laws of the state without formal recognition of Zionism, and in turn receive the rights of residents, aliens with no political rights. And third, if they don't accept these 2, then they should immigrate to other Arab countries. These religious hardliners also support the unity of Jerusalem under the Israeli sovereignty, encourage Jewish immigration to Israel, that Israel from all over the world, they should come and immigrate to the Israel. And they also encourage Palestinian Arabs to leave Palestine. On the opposite side, the Muslim and Palestinian perspective is based on some narratives. For example, they say that the ownership of Palestine land they have this ownership on the basis of religious teachings. What are the religious teachings? Let me explain here for a short while. That religious teachings are the land of Palestine is not clearly mentioned in the Quran, which gave the right of Palestine to the Palestinians. But after the expulsion of the Jews in the 70 AD, the Muslims, the Palestinians, they were settled there, and after the time of the second Caliph Umar radiallahu anhu, the Muslim conquered the land. And throughout the history, the history shows that Muslim, Jews, and Christians lived side by side in the Palestine until, as Dr. Kulaya said, till the Balfour Declaration. And in the when it was the state of Israel was formally announced. This is the situation that the Muslims say that we are the real owner. The Israelis are they have occupied our land. They are the aggressors. While on the second point is that they say that as the Israelis are the oppressors, so jihad, the hardliners say that jihad is permitted in this situation. If we look to this matter in the broad sense, on one side it is a Palestinian issue, on the other side it is an Arab issue, and at the third point it is an Islamic issue. And as I earlier mentioned, that the two aspects now is going to be diminishing, minimizing day by day, and it becomes a Palestinian issue only. The Muslims revered the land of Palestine because one, that Masjid al-Aqsa is here. Number two, which was the first Qibla of the Muslim, where the Muslim were used to pray before the immigration of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to Medina. Similarly, there are some prophecies in the hadith, in the tradition of the Sunnah of the Prophet, which give some impression that this land should be under the Muslim control. The other point is that the hardliners from all sides, from the Christian sides, from the Muslim sides, and from the Jewish side, that there will be a great war. That is called Armageddon, in which the Christ and Antichrist will have a battle with each other, and ultimately the Christ will emerge as conqueror. So they say that till that time we have to preserve the Palestinian land with us. In this regard, now coming to the current status, that Hamas says that beside those arguments which I gave earlier, they say that the Palestine is a land of waqf, endowment, because Sheikh Amin al-Husseini said that the Palestinians should not give this land to buy or purchase to other people, but it should be given to an Islamic endowment waqf. Therefore, the Hamas said that all the Palestinian land is waqf, and no one is allowed to give its ownership to any other person. In this regard, they regard the Israelis as foreign agent, while on the other hand, the hardliners of the Israeli, some of them, they say that Israel is doing a great job because they are hosting aliens, their aliens population in Palestine, while the Palestinians said that you are the aliens. So this is a great point of concern among them, which is an obstacle to make a lasting peace among them. The role of Ikhwan al-Muslimin is very obvious because Hamas was influenced by the Ikhwan al-Muslimin of the Egypt and the Jordan and Syria and other Arab countries. But particularly after the war of 1967, it has a great effect. And after the Iranian Revolution of 1979, when Hezbollah and Hamas were funded by the Iranian government, that exacerbated the battle and the differences among them much more. If we compare both the stance of the hardliners of the Jewish and the hardliners of the Muslim, we find some common points. For example, both claim of the territory on religious ground, number one. Number two, both sides adopt an exclusive view, means that no one is allowed. Only Israelis say that Palestinians should live, and the Palestinians say that Israelis should leave the country. So they have both exclusive view. Most of the religious zealots on both sides consider negotiation tantamount to disobeying God, that we shouldn't negotiate with each other at all. And both draw legitimacy of the use of violence from their holy scriptures. Both sides consider it a battle between good and evil. One is said that Palestinian is evil, the other say Israel is evil. So it is said that it is a battle between good and evil. And the other point is that both Israeli side, this is only for the Israeli side, that they see extended borders of the Israel, that they don't confine to the present day Israel. Given this brief discussion, what is the way forward? I would wind up my discussion on this point. There are two main suggestions. One is that, which is not very easy, but that is the only way to move forward, and that is introduction of new hermeneutics or reinterpretation of the text, which make this issue more and more conflict. What it means by new hermeneutics, and I said that it is not an easy task, but however, it is the way to move forward. Number one, from both sides, the religious scholars, if they sit with each other together and they revisit the text with its and comprehend the text with its historical background, the cause of the text, and number three, the rationale of the text, and to comprehend the text with its reference to the context. Revisiting of these, because as earlier said, that the verses which gave this land, the promised land, to the Israelites, it is a question mark that whether it is for the all time, or it was for the time when these verses were revealed. It is a point of concern, and there are some scholars from the Israeli side which say that it is not a religious issue, it is a political issue, and the land of Palestine is not for all the time given to them, for the to the Israelis. Number two, there should be exegesis of the text, not eisegesis, as I earlier differentiated between the exegesis and eisegesis. Eisegesis to explain to the verses according to the biases of the interpreter, while exegesis means to explain the text as it is, with reference to the context and to rationale and to the knowledge. Number two, it is the duty of, or the obligation of the religious scholars to correct misinterpretation and misunderstanding of the verses which justify violence. Third, the correction of historical narratives which are contributing to the differences. And the other one, fourth or fifth, that to denunciate terrorism. Terrorism in all form and manifestation from both the sides. The other issues which may contribute, that is the interfaith dialogue, which will be helpful to minimize the differences. Identification of peace builders and peace building organizations, and give some opportunity to the organization to contribute the economic condition development of the Palestinians. And the other one, initiatives are needed to be taken to increase engagement between the religious groups from both the sides. And using the modern conflict theory techniques will be helpful, and it is up to the Khurshid. You can explain to your students that what are the conflict resolution theory and how the techniques are there. Emphasis on moderation and compassion on human rights. You know that Dr. Kublai Azad also mentioned it, that they suffered a lot. Jews suffered a lot. Now they are very sensitive about two things: alleviation of poverty and about the human rights. If we highlight these points to the Israeli extracting text from the Holy Scriptures, it will be helpful. Similarly, the sanctity of the holy sites and the freedom of worship, it is needed that the sanctity of the holy sites should be ensured. The freedom of worship should be there for all the followers of the monotheistic religion, Christianity, Muslim, Judaism, and Christians. Peace builders, we should know the peace builders, who are the peace builders, and if we find the peace builders from both the sides, from the Christians as well, there are, I know personally, Dr. Minhas, Majeed is well aware of that, and other scholars that who are the real peace builders. They can take initiatives in this regard. Last but not the least, it is clear that all developments which took place recently, it cannot be reversed at all overnight in a day. However, it is clear that if there is no peace in Palestine and Israel, there will be unrest across the globe, and there will be no peace in the world. So it is the needed that we should give some time, so some space for the peace builders. This is the only way to move forward. At this, I will wind up my presentation. If I have taken some more time, I'm sorry for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for a very detailed and long presentation. I'm sorry that we skipped Professor Dr. Nazir Hussain time because he was not online at that moment. He is now online. Professor Dr. Nazir Hussain Saab is a professor in the School of Politics and International Relations, Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad. Currently, he is the Dean of Faculty of Social Sciences in the similar university. Previously, he was associated with the Department of Defense and Strategic Studies. He has, to his credit, a postdoc research fellowship from the French Institute
Yes,
of
sir.
International
Assalamu alaikum.
Relations. Right. He was visiting fellow at Henry L. Stimson Center, Washington, D.C. He has worked a lot. Today, he shall speak on the historical context of Arab-Israel conflict. So I invite Professor Dr. Nazir Hussain to speak on the moment. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Minhas. Thank you, Khurshid, and thank you, Ahmad, because of some internet issues. Already Qibla Yazab and Professor Rashid Hemman have eloquently discussed and tried to describe the historical perspective of this relationship between the Israelis, Jews, and the Muslims and the Arabs. But I'll dwell on those things which have not been covered by my respective two colleagues. First and foremost, please try to make a difference between the relationship of the Arabs and the Jews. This is different than the relationship of the Arabs and Israel. So far, nothing has been discussed about Zionism. Nothing has been discussed about the people are something different. Then we are discussing the relationship of the state vis-a-vis the very concept of the Westphalian state system. So in the Westphalian state system, the idea of the Jewish state or Israel came, as you know, Theodor Herzl, etc., etc. But we have to discuss the Arab-Israel relation from the time when the state of Israel was created or established in 1948. Now, after having established this fact, now let's discuss from where this Arab world came. We are not talking about the Arab civilization. We are not talking about the Arab people. We are not talking about the Muslim people. We are talking about the Arab states. Before 1920, there was no Arab state. It was a disintegration of the empire, Ottoman Empire, that the Arab states have started to emerge. I think to me, my understanding of last 30 years of my being a student of Middle East, the Arab state or Arab concept emerged only in March 1945 when 6 or 7 Arab states formed the Arab League. Before that, Egypt was totally different. Syria was totally different. Mesopotamia was totally different. So the very concept of the Arab state was very different. So therefore, I'll begin my discourse of this historical analysis of Arab-Israel relation from 1948. Please remember, all my students, that the case of Palestine and Israel, the case of Palestine and the Jews, and the case of the Arabs and Israel is totally different, although it is intermingled. But here we are focusing only on Arab and Israel relationship. Please remember that the resolution, UN General Assembly Resolution 181 was passed in 1947. That's the real basis of the conflictual relationship started between the Arabs and Israel. What this resolution 181 stipulated, this stipulated that there would be two states, one the Jewish state and the other the the Palestinian state, and the sacred places, the revered places by all three religions, the Jews and the Christian and the Muslim, would be under the guaranteeship of the United Nations. Israelis, because of their idea of the state, because of their so many things, accepted this plan, but the Arabs, 6 Arab states, rejected this very plan. So from there, the conflictual relationship of the Arabs and Israel started. After having said this, let me also clarify one important aspect of the Jewish mythology. Probably Professor Rashid would bear me out, that the Jews, or the concept of Zionism, has one fundamental clause, and that clause is the law of the return. And this means that every Jew and Jewish living anywhere around the world is part and parcel of the Jewish state. This clause amplifies that Israel is expanding in both in territory because of the wars and in population. And the Arabs or the Palestinian are being marginalized. And the very map which is being circulated on very social books, you can see how the tiny land, 10% land, are left with the now let's map the Arab world. The Arab world, which is now signing agreements with Israel, has started, are the composition of 6 Arab states called the Gulf Cooperation Council states. Rest, Egypt has already signed a peace agreement. Jordan has already signed a peace agreement. We don't consider Turkey as a peace as an Arab state, but it has also signed. Qatar had some relation, etc., etc. Other Arab states, we take the Arab Maghreb, which has Morocco and Algeria and Libya and Tunisia. They don't have any relationship with this Arab context of recognition, etc. So the focus is purely on these 6 Arab states. Now, as a student of Middle East, let me be very clear, let me be very blunt, let me be very objective, that these 6 Arab states, except for Saudi Arabia, all these Arab states came into being after 1948, after the creation of the state of Israel. And if I go to the history of how these states were created, it will be very time consuming, and I understand there's not much time. So these 6 states never fought a war with Israel. They had never a conflictual relationship with Israel, and they had never ever any dispute with Israel in terms of territory and in terms of anything. And for the last 20 years, any person who is absolutely or very minutely watching the dynamics of the Middle East would know that these 6 Arab states had an informal relationship with Israel for the last 20 years. It is now open to the world that these states are trying to have open relationship with Israel. Now let's see their composition. They all are either the monarchies, sheikhs, or the one-man rule. So for them to decide and have a peace agreement with Israel is no issue for them at all. So systematically, if today one country has signed, tomorrow it will be Bahrain, then Oman, then Kuwait, and then Qatar, and probably with Israel in terms of having full diplomatic relation. In the entire Arab world, there is only one state which is not in harmony with Israel, that is Syria. Until unless the Syrian, and Syria is called the linchpin of the Middle East. Until unless Syria is not resolved, the Arab-Israel conflictual relationship would never ever be resolved. And of course, we have many other theories, conspiracy theories, which I don't want to go into detail. So having recognized Israel by these 2 states and then subsequently 4 or 5 other states has an historical context that they never fought, they never had a conflictual relationship, they never had a dispute, territorial, border, human, territory, etc., etc. So for them to have an agreement was no issue. Now, why this place? Why this timing? please remember two important things. President Donald Trump wants to be re-elected, and therefore he wants something concrete to be given to the people of United States of America. See what we have done. Netanyahu is fighting a battle of political survival for him, for he wants to be to break the history by being elected fifth time in the history of entire history of Israel. So he is vying for that. And please remember, he has some corruption scandals which he wanted, which he wants to sideline because to win the election. And as you know very well, I don't want to go into details. Now, what is the pressure on these Arab states? The pressure is from the United States of America that if you don't recognize, and of course, last point, which probably my friend Rashid Ahmed Saab had tried, the Iranian threat. Of course, we agree, it's beyond doubt that Iran is being considered, is being perceived as a major threat by these six Arab states. And I'm no doubt in saying that Iran has not done enough to assuage the feeling, the perception of the Arab states. So this is leading, the Iranian threat is very larger at the horizon of the Arab state because of the sectarian card, because of the religious card, because of the Persian hegemony, etc., whatever you want to say. So therefore, these six Arab states, because of their own political compulsion, because of the American pressure, and because of the Iranian threat, are going towards Israel having the normalization of their relationship. Thank you very much. This I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for a brief and very comprehensive, detailed lecture. We are having the last speaker in this session. He is from Malaysia. We welcome him. He is Professor Broto Wardoyo. His brief bio is that he is Assistant Professor in International Security Studies at the Department of International Relations, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, University of Indonesia. He joined the department in 2002 and gets his tenure position in 2010. He has earned his PhD from National Chengdu University, Taiwan. He currently serves as the Secretary of the Department and formerly served as Editor-in-Chief, Journal Global. He has published several pieces on Middle Eastern politics and writes books on the introduction of security studies in Indonesian language. So I hereby invite Mr. Broto Wardoyo to speak on the Indonesian perspective on Israel's claim of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. So, sir, Broto Wardoyo.
Thank you, Professor Khurshid. Could you hear me? Okay. Thank you for inviting me to this session, to this seminar. My name is Broto Wardoyo. I'm the Assistant Professor at the Department of International Relations, University of Indonesia. And this afternoon, I'm going to present my ideas, my thought on the Indonesian perspective on the Israeli claims on the West Bank and also the Gaza Strip. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to I would like to make 3 points. The first one is whether the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a religious or a nationalist conflict. It also exists in Indonesia. In fact, this issue has been at the heart of the way Indonesian government and also Indonesian people build their relationship with the Palestinian and also hatred toward the Israelis. And the second point that I also would like to make is basically when we discuss about the Palestinian issues in Indonesia, for Indonesian, Palestinian issues or Palestinian are at the heart of their, at the center of their heart. So basically, there is no way that the Indonesian government will recognize Israel before the Palestinian gets their independence. Of course, the independence should be based on a mutual consensus between Israel and also Palestine. Since I'm not a native speaker in English, I prepare a presentation which I hope it would help you to understand what I'm going to discuss. Please inform me if you manage to see it or you fail to see it. The way I'm going to present my talk is basically begin with the introduction to give you a brief understanding of the Indonesian and Indonesian perception on the Palestinian issues, and then I will discuss two gaps. The first one is the gap between the state perception against the society perception, and then there are also gaps within the society, especially among the Muslim community in Indonesia. And then there are two trends that is coming in Indonesia right now. The first one is the politicization of the Palestinian issues, and then the second one will be the commodification of the Palestinian issues. And then I will end the discussion with the conclusion. So every time I present a paper or I give a lecture on the Israeli and Palestinian conflict, I always begin with this statement, which is basically when we discuss about Indonesia and how they see or how they perceive the Palestinian issues or Palestinian people, I would always argue that Indonesians are basically more Palestinian than the Palestinians themselves. Meaning that we, the Indonesian community, the Muslim community in Indonesia, are more reluctant to even hold a discussion or a peace talk with the Israelis because they always consider that the whole land that now we know as the Palestinian and Israeli state, both are belong to the Palestinian. As you also know that Indonesia is basically the I would not say the largest Muslim country because I'm not really sure about the data, but it is one of the country with Muslim population, with the domination of Muslim population. According to the data from our statistic board, 87% from our population are Muslims. But please bear in mind that Indonesia is not a religious country. Some say that it is a secular country, but some would say that it is not really a secular country because we base the principle, the philosophy of the state. One of them is because we always believe in one God as the first pillar of our Pancasila, which is the philosophy of the state. And then Indonesia is also known as a democratic and moderate Muslim country. It also hosts to various Islamic groups ranging from Sunni and then until we also have a small number of Shi'i community. And in the recent years, you probably also heard about the fact that there is an increase of Islamic penetration or a growing piety among the Muslim population in Indonesia, especially following the fall of Suharto in 1998. So if we discuss about the Israeli Palestinian issues in the eyes of Indonesia, in the perception of Indonesia, the first thing that you will recognize or you can identify quickly is that there is a gap between the society's perception and also the state's perception. So the state tend to use the anti-colonial sentiments when they build their relations with the Palestinians. So the Indonesian support, the government of Indonesian support to Palestine and the state of Palestine is basically based on our refusal to all form of colonialism because it is written in our preamble of our constitution. And we always consider what the Israeli do to the Palestinian territory in West Bank and also in Gaza Strip is basically a form of colonialism. There are experts from the US and then also from Europe who always argue that occupation is basically not similar or different from colonialism, but for us in Indonesia, we always consider that what the Israeli does in the West Bank and also Gaza Strip is basically a form of colonialism. But this state perception of the Israeli and Palestinian conflict are different from what the society perceives of the conflict. As Professor Rashid also mentioned that there are also religious interpretation when we discuss the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And it's also evident in Indonesia, in which most of the Muslim community or majority of the Muslim community in Indonesia, when they gave their support to the Palestine or the Palestinian people, they basically base their support on the Muslim Brotherhood sentiment instead of the anti-colonialism. So we can see that there is a gap between what the government perceive and also what the society perceive when we discuss or when we talk about the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. And it creates a problem in itself because in some cases, when the government make a policy or adopt a policy, there will be a resistance from the Muslim community in Indonesia because the Muslim community always says that the government did not really do enough to support the Palestine or the Palestinian people. And the second gap that we can identify when we discuss about the Israeli and Palestinian conflict in Indonesia is that there is actually a different perception and also different understanding among Muslim group in Indonesia. To give you a brief understanding, Indonesia has two major Muslim groups. The first one is Nahdlatul Ulama, which is more traditional, and the other one is Muhammadiyah, which is more modern in the way they interpret and understand Islamic teaching. And there are differences between NU and Muhammadiyah when they react to the issues in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, in which the NU leaders, not all of them, but most of them, are more moderate and non-religious view, or they are not really consider the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a religious conflict. Instead, they always argue, not all of them and not always, but most of them, in many cases, they argue that the conflict between Palestine and also Israel is basically the conflict between two nationalist forces instead of a conflict between two religions or religious communities. And an example you can probably see is when our President Abdurrahman Wahid in late 1990s, he had an idea to establish diplomatic relations with Israel. And it was soon created tension within the Islamic community because they always argue that relation with Israel should not be conducted, and diplomatic relation especially is certainly prohibited. So when we discuss, we find the similarities or commonalities between the what Professor Rashid and also another speaker has already mentioned, that when we discuss about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, we tend to see a movement from the civil wars to nationalist conflict between Palestinian and also Israel, following the establishment of PLO, and then we also witness the Islamization of conflict with the birth of Hamas and the growing of Hamas in Palestine. And if we see it, the Indonesian, from the Indonesian perspective, from the Indonesian point of view, you can also see that in the past, during Sukarno and Suharto era, which is 1945 until 1990, early 1990, or maybe mid 1990, the Indonesian government and also most of the population, because at that time we were living under the authoritarian rule, our perception of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, basically we consider it as a nationalist conflict between the Palestinian and also Israelis, or basically we are following the anti-colonialism spirit. But following Suharto, following the fall of Suharto during the reform era, Indonesians tend to consider this conflict as a religious conflict between Islam and also Judaism. It is in line with what actually happened in Indonesia during this era. with the Islamization of Indonesian society. To give you a brief understanding of how this politicization of Palestine question exists or happen in Indonesia, you have to understand that following the fall of Suharto, Indonesia are basically opening up their politics, their domestic politics. In the previous era, we only have one Islamic party, which is basically a merge of various Islamic parties in the past. The government of Suharto forced them to merge into one party. And then after we have a reform in 1998, there are various new Islamic parties in Indonesia. So we tend to see that some of these new Islamic parties, of course, they have to rely on the Muslim communities, or they even establish to represent certain Muslim communities or certain Islamic groups in Indonesia. And at the same time, we also witness that the nationalist parties in Indonesia, following the reform era, they also establish sort of Islamic organs. This is basically their tool to gain voters. So it is basically can be explained with the logic of electoral politics. And also at the same time, we also witness the increasing role of Islamic groups, not necessarily parties. We witness the growing role of Nahdlatul Ulama to the point where the current president decided to choose one of the leader of Nahdlatul Ulama as the vice president. And then there's also an increasing role of Muhammadiyah, the MUI or the Majelis Ulama Indonesia, which is basically representative of different groups, ulama in Indonesia, and then also various or different Islamic groups in Indonesia. So Indonesia, following the reform era, basically enters the time where Muslim voters are important for political parties. And then some of the politicians from various parties, especially from Islamic parties, they always make reference to the Palestine issues to gain voter. Even during the 2019 presidential election, the President Joko Widodo at that time was one of the candidates. He also tapped into the issues of Palestinian question to raise awareness and to gain support from the Muslim community. It's happened to the point where I usually make fun of it by saying that for Indonesian, Palestine is basically the 35th province of Indonesia. We have 34 provinces in Indonesia, and to the point where Palestinian issues is always appear in our electoral politics, that I usually make fun of it by saying this. And the recent trends that happen in Indonesia is not only a politicization of the Palestinian issues, but there's also a sort of commodification of Palestinian issues. This is basically rooted in the fact that most of the Indonesian society, they always argue that the government did not support Palestinian enough. That is the argument, basically. So that the society decided that they will conduct fundraisings, and then they will assist Palestinian, they will support Palestinian even financially and infrastructure projects such as the hospital in Gaza Strips. It's happened not only through the legal channel, which is the well-known organization, but it's also happened on the street. So it is quite common if you visit Indonesia, you go to Jakarta or some of the other area in Indonesia, and you find there are some people doing fundraising on behalf of the Palestinian people. And it's create problems because most of us, we do not really see, or we do not really sure that the fund that they collected are actually goes to the Palestinian people. So this is kind of a new way of making profit from the Palestinian issues in Indonesia. That is the biggest picture of the Indonesian community. That is when we say the Muslim community in Indonesia, which is the dominant group in Indonesia. But there are also different phases of Indonesia. If you see to different areas, such as in Papua, which is on the eastern part of Indonesia, or in the North Celebes, for example, which are not Muslim dominated, but they are Christian or Catholic dominated area. You can see that there are support for Israel in this area. And the problem is basically similar with the Muslim community in Indonesia. In the Muslim community, you have groups which interpret the conflict as religious conflict, but you also have groups which interpret the conflict as nationalist conflict. In the case of Papua, or in the case of North Celebes, or in the case of Christian and Catholic community in Indonesia, there are also groups who interpret, who have their understanding that the nowadays Israel are similar with Israel in the Bible. But there's also groups with well educated, and they understand perfectly that the nowadays Israel and the Bible version of Israel are two different entities. So in the case of Indonesia, you can see that there are a debate, there are problems with understanding this conflict, both in the Muslim community and also the Christian and Catholic community. So in conclusion, I supported what the previous speakers have already mentioned, that we have to be very careful when we identifying the conflict. As you can see in the case of Indonesia, the debate is real. The government, they always consider this as the anti-colonial sentiment, and the reason they support the Palestinian is basically because of the sentiment. But the society, especially the dominant Muslim community in Indonesia, they usually use the Muslim Brotherhood issues or the Muslim Brotherhood sentiment to support the Palestine. But the interesting fact is basically either we are using anti-colonialism standpoint or Muslim Brotherhood sentiment. At the end of the road, Indonesian will surely support Palestinian independence. So it's kind of an issue in itself, where there are debate, sometimes there are quarrel between the government and also Muslim community, or even within the Muslim community. But at the end of the road, we are basically will not support Israel in any way. And nowadays, with the problem of politicization, the growing politicization, and also the commodification of Palestinian issues, I tend to see that in the next few years, I believe there will be a change of opinion, a change of perspective, because when I spoke with my students or the younger generation in Indonesia, they did not really consider these issues as a religious issues, and they can see properly that when we discuss about Palestine and Israel, basically we are discussing about the issues between two national forces. So I think with that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you very much for having me, for inviting me to this webinar. So if you have any question, comment, I would like to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wardoyo. Indeed, it was a very knowledgeable presentation. This is now the time for question and answers. If there is any question from the audience for any of the speaker, we had 4 speakers on this session. So just open your mic, ask the question, introduce yourself, and ask the questions briefly, and please make them brief.
Assalamu alaikum.
It's okay, please.
I'm a student of MPhil in Center of Biotechnology and Microbiology. And sir, I have a question for Dr. Rashid Ahmed. And sir, my question is that what will be the impact this whole situation, on the impact of this whole situation on the Pakistani people and the society of Pakistan as a whole, and also the interaction of Pakistan with other countries is related to these issues.
Thank you, Wasil. In fact, there would be far-reaching consequences not only for Pakistan but for the whole world, because you see that on one hand, this outreach of the Israel to the Arab states minimized the intensity of the issue from the Muslim Ummah, from the Arab world, and now it has become literally an issue between Palestinian and the Israelis. Now, in Pakistan, you see that the stance of Pakistan to the Arab will be, as time will pass, it will be softened, but the Islamic parties would never be agreed with the stance of the government. Ultimately, I don't think that there would be some positive results of this outreach on Pakistan. However, we should be very realistic. I think that our main concern should be the amelioration of the Palestinians, how we can help them. If we make our connections more strong with Palestinians instead of the Israelis, it would be more better. That Pakistan should more make a stronger relation with Palestinians. And you know that the PLO has already recognized Israel, but with certain conditions. If we can make give some help to the Palestinian, and the ultimate result of the two nation states become the reality, this will be a real help not only for the Palestinian, not only for the Muslim Ummah, but it will be for the whole Muslim. Because until and unless this issue is here on the world map, there would be no peace. In one way or another way, there will be violence. So I think that the realistic we should follow a realistic approach to this issue.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please, next question. Mr. Lieutenant General Asad Durrani has joined us in this session. We warmly welcome you, sir. Okay, is there any question?
Yes, sir. Sir, may I ask another question from Sir Kiblayas?
Okay, go on.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Assalamu alaikum.
Sir, I have also a question from you related to this situation. So, basically, it is also the problem between the Arab and the Jews also, because they will see it on religious basis, and also the Arab countries will look at this situation, look to this situation on the economic purposes. So, according to you, sir, what is the basic and what is the strongest narrative related to this conflict and this issue?
Oh, thank you very much, but I couldn't hear your question fully. Can you repeat your question?
Sir, my question is was that there are two main basic points related to these issues between about this conflict. One is the economic, and the other is the religious. So, sir, what will be, according to your own perspective, sir, what will be the choice of the Arab countries between between these 2 points? One is the economic, and the other is religious.
Uh, Probably, as far as I have a little study of this theme, it is in the main the problem is related to the Iran-Arab conflict, and the Arab policy seems Iran-centric. They are trying to make good relationship with Israel because of the fear of Iran. So it is more political in dimension rather than taking into consideration the religious aspects. And of course, economic is there, but it is in the broad sense political considerations, geopolitical.
Thank you so much, sir. I understand.
Is there any other question from the
Sir,
audience, please?
I would like to ask a question. As I was out and about for a few interviews here and there in different places, I was constantly asked about what was the, uh, we can say, the real impact of the Iranian threat over the Arab countries, because Iran itself is a third world country marred with a lot of political, economic, and social problems. So, and their nuclear agenda is not as coherent or as strong as other countries, per se, Israel. So what is the basic threat that the Arab world is facing from Iran that has forced them towards or to move towards Israel for extended protection or an umbrella protection like scenario? So can any of the speakers kindly explain the extent of the threat that Iran is posing, or what are the basic threat perceptions that have been looming amongst the Arab countries with this regard? Thank you.
Professor Broto Wardoyo, can you respond to her?
Thank you, Professor Corsit. I think the problem is not really on the actual threat that Iran has to the Arab countries, but it's more on the perception of threat that they have. I mean, if we look into the history of the relationship between Arab countries and also Iran, we can learn that they have quite animosity in the past. It is not only political issues. It is not only related to material dimension, but it's also related to the difference between Sunni and Shia as well. So I think this is one of the most important reason or most important issues between the Arab and also the Iranian. And to the point where in Indonesia, they always argue, they always believe that the difference between Sunni and Shia is basically the animosity are even higher than the animosity between Muslim and Jews. So this is what I think is explaining the behavior of the Arab state. But in addition to that, of course, we also have to think about the economic benefit that the Arab state will gain as well. I think that is my response, Professor Corsi.
Thank you, sir. It is up to Lieutenant General Asad Durrani. He wants to speak something. Please, sir, you are welcome.
Thank you, Khurshid. I mean, my name was mentioned, and so I thought that maybe something is expected from me. I just wanted to listen in to all the experts, because they are the ones who can present the things in the proper historical context, in the political context. My own very brief experience tells me that this situation has arisen basically because the Saudis panicked after the first Gulf War, 91. I was a witness to that. It was under my watch from this side. They learned a few lessons and they wanted to mend their fences with the regional neighbors. And that is something that I saw firsthand. But after the second attack in 2003, the whole picture there changed to the extent that Saudis basically depend on oil. That is where all their money comes from. That is, frankly, their only asset. And then they found that after this, when Iraq's regime was removed and certain other developments took place, most of the, I think there's some lady who talked about Iran, most of the oil sources were either with the Shiite countries, except for the Kurdish enclave, or their own eastern province also has a good number of Shiites. So this is paranoia about the sectarian paranoia of the Saudis that made them panic to the extent that they even went and attacked Yemen. Who in the right mind will ever attack Yemen unless one is as mad, as gone bonkers, has lost it, like people who come to Afghanistan? No one goes to Yemen. They've twice been licked there, and they went there. They even, started burning their fences with Qatar. And the most important, the disasters was, because I saw them, you used to also try and do something about Iran, because after all it's a neighbor. And they lined up with Israel because of their enmity with Iran. So if that type of development has taken place, the client states, Saudi client states like UAE and so on, they never counted for me. If that be so, one can understand their paranoia and their problem. There is no need for countries like Pakistan to go berserk and join that bandwagon. We already have, after a long time, I think, done a few sensible things. In the region, we have created some sort of an understanding with the countries who are going to hold together because of the region. Iran, Turkey, China, Russia, and it started because we wanted to also coordinate our efforts on Afghanistan. Since that has happened, look how useful it has been to us. Even on the eastern side, where some sort of a quad might be coming up, India, United States, Australia, probably Japan also, when this is coming up, what is it that providing us that type of a cushion? This is our positioning about 10, 15 years ago that has done it. Please do not spoil it now, because regardless of what happens, I was very happy when we refused to send troops to Yemen. For the first time, I think the parliament played a positive role. Otherwise, I cannot recall if our parliament ever did something good for the people or good for the region. But this was one. So this has happened. By all means, discuss it. But no, changing our policy on Israel will not bring us the benefit that we are looking for. We already have. Because of their pressure, we did not go to Kuala Lumpur. What a disastrous decision that was. But now that they have made to us very clearly where we all stand, we should be quite happy with the strategic environment that we have created around us. And Israel does not belong to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your candid and very deep comments. If there are questions from any other, please, Farhat Osman Qazi, do you want to ask question? Okay, is there any question from any other one? It's okay. I think we are going to conclude. Madam.
For the intervention, we have Professor Dr. Ijaz Khan with us. If he would like to say something about these new developments in the Gulf and Middle East. Sir, Professor Dr. Ijaz Khan. Sir, kindly unmute your...
Yeah, thank you, Minhas. Now, the mic was off, so I just off. Now, on this very important issue, this debate on recognition of Israel or all this issue has actually started because of UAE doing that, and another country, I guess Oman or someone has also has started going on that road. There are other reports of Saudis or other Arabs doing. So there have been arguments. Listening to the different speakers, most consider that as if it is only a religious issue, and only religious people are opposed to Israel, or there is only a religious argument against that. There is something another aspect to it. One is the geopolitical aspect, which Asad Durrani Saab and also Qibla as earlier indicated. But there is an international legal aspect to it, and there is a human rights aspect to it. You see, the issue is the UN Charter, as well as the different laws of armed conflict, considers annexation of territory by use of force is totally illegal. Again, you cannot annex territory. So whether the original creation of Israel was legal or not is a different question. Even if that was, the question of annexation of land through use of force after 1967 is totally again violates basic human rights, international humanitarian law, and the UN Charter. So any recognition or non-recognition must take that aspect in count. Then in Pakistan, we have to, like Qibla Sahab also mentioned and Asad Durrani Sahab mentioned, that we have to keep in mind that the Arab recognition is also motivated, impressed by their relations with Iran. We have, up till now, Pakistan has kept a balance. Okay, we don't want to go against Saudi Arabia, but we don't want to go against Iran as well. We have to keep up. It's a very delicate balance and difficult as well to keep in this extreme polarization taking place. But that is the problem of Pakistan's diplomacy and its location. It has to. So you cannot be seen as becoming party to a new alignment against Iran. Similarly, you don't want to become against Saudi as well. So that has to. Then another aspect, I think, is that we have to keep in mind or Pakistan's long-standing issue on Kashmir is based on the right of self-determination. Of course, we disregard self-determination in one part and start keep talking of self-determination in another part that contradicts Pakistan's policy. So, while we have to be pragmatic, one has to keep that legal aspect, Pakistan's image as a law-abiding state, as a state that raises the issue of human rights and rights of self-determination is important. for us. Images are important. So pragmatism is also there, but these aspects are also there. And even pragmatism, I don't think today says that you have to. I mean, you just recognize Israel and a lot of great things will happen. So you have to keep a balance, I think. Otherwise, without recognition, Pakistan have been keeping a certain contact with Israel. That is, Asad Durrani would know more. During the 80s, Israeli, I mean, even in Peshawar's Christian graveyard, there are Israeli army officers' graveyard. They are reported. I'm not revealing a secret or anything. They are there. They were here. So some unrecognized relationship at a certain level may be there, but recognition is a totally different question. And it is not only religious. That is important. We have to keep in mind that it is only because of religion you are opposed to it. If religion goes out of it, then it's okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If any of the audience have got any question, please you can ask. Otherwise, we want to wind up the session. It's okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. With this, our first sessions come to an end. And exactly after 15 minutes, we will go for the second session. You all are invited to join us again there. If Dr. Minhas want to say something, it's okay. Otherwise, we want to wind up the session.
Thank you, everyone. Professor Dr. Kiblaya Saab, Professor Dr. Nazir Hussain, I think he has left after his talk. Professor Bruto and other distinguished guests, Professor Dr. Rashid Ahmed and other participants. We are greatly thankful to all of you for taking time out of your busy schedule. And we look forward that you would be attending our next session because another theme would be discussed in that session, and it would start at exactly 2 p.m. I would also like to thank the speakers for keeping time limitation while in their minds while they were presenting. Thank you all once again. Special thanks to Lieutenant General Asad Durrani and Dr. Ijaz Khan, Ambassador Asif Durrani, who joined this first session of International Webinar. Thank you very much. Take care and Allah Hafiz.